Hey y'all, hey, it's JJ Conway. Welcome to Building Wealth Together, where our goal is to help you walk in abundance and leave a legacy. It's Juice with JJ. This is where I keep you informed about scams, financial controversies, and money shenanigans so you can keep your cash flow out of their pockets and funding your dreams. Let's get into it. Good morning, everybody. Today's Juice with JJ is going to take a different direction than what I announced last week. So those of you who are members of my Building Wealth Together Facebook group, you'll note that last week we did some random recordings. Those of you who aren't members of the group, let me tell you what that means. What that means is sometimes I'm teaching a class and there might be a recording that didn't come out very well. And I like to do random recording day where I just make up for all of those and then we upload them to the portal. The reason I do that is because I find that I teach better and more energetically when I have a live audience, which is why I like to do these podcasts live when possible, right? I find that it just does something for me and helps me bring the juice, all right? And so we did one of those last week, and I had this amazing impromptu thing about life is not fair. And I told everybody, hey, we're going to use that for next week's Juice with JJ, so invite your friends, get your popcorn, you're going to hear it again. Well, a lot has happened in our nation between then and now, and I just feel like I can't let the weekend pass without saying something about it. Before I do, let me reassure you and reassure any new subscribers that this is your first time ever hearing me. This is not a political podcast. This is a financial podcast. And the reason I'm addressing this is because there is a significant portion of our population that has a harder time building wealth than another portion of our population. Okay? But this is not a political podcast, and today's Juice with JJ is not actually about politics. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what your beliefs and your values are with regards to the topic that I'm speaking on today. Regardless of our beliefs, regardless of our party affiliations, regardless of who we voted for, regardless of whether or not we think things are getting too conservative or whether we think things are getting too liberal, I personally find that both sides use the same arguments, they just swap out the names. And so that's a whole nother discussion we can have offline. That's not the point of my podcast. One of the reasons I make that qualifier is because a couple months ago, I did a post about being the first African American to be a physicist in the Air Force. And I talked about how I was originally told I could not do that because of my race. Like I was literally told I could not declare physics at the Air Force Academy and I could not go on to be a physicist in the Air Force because blacks can't do physics. Like that's what they literally told me. And so somebody reported me as abusive and hate speech and all that stuff. And I'm just like, that's my life. That's what somebody told me. And I know other people are like, oh, you should stop making everything about race. I'm sorry. I almost didn't have my job that I held for 23 years because of race. So you can say racism has been over since, what was that? People like to say, well, you've been able to vote since the 1800s, get over it, right? No, I can't get over it because it's still a problem in my lifetime. Okay. And so this isn't a political post. I'm not going to make any kind of commentary on, protesting or any of that, except that regardless of who you voted for, you can no longer ignore that we have a problem in this nation. If you observed what happened in our capital, you can no longer pretend that you don't see the difference in how people who look like my white husband are treated versus those who look like my black son and his black mother are treated. The same people who sneered and jested at those who protested the disparities of justice against people who look like me and my son, they not only protested violently, but they desecrated our hallowed halls of governance. These are the same people that said, well, if the blacks would just stop breaking the law, they'd have nothing to be worried about. These people broke the law and had nothing to be worried about. Now, before I continue, let me explain why this is important on a financial podcast. I may have done that already, but just in case, I want to make sure I am, because again, I'm recording live and I'm not going to go back to edit. There is a difficulty for certain people to build wealth in this country because there's a difference in how law enforcement treats people of color. There's a difference in how employers treat people of color. There is a difference between how our major institutions treat people of color and how they treat people who are not of color. Okay? This is why a lot of immigrants in our country, at least the ones who've learned the code, do not put black even if they are darker than I am. And one guy from Ethiopia, he's like, you never put black. You have to put white or you won't get a job. Okay. So that's why this is important to my podcast and people who I want to attract to my tribe. Not asking you to accept ownership of it. Maybe it's not your fault that we're in the situation that we're in right now, but I'm asking you to observe. Observe. Okay. Now, a woman lost her life in this fray. Actually, several people lost their life. But at the time that I made my Facebook post that got flagged by Facebook, a woman had lost her life. And the only way I heard about it was a lot of people thought that she was one of the Capitol workers and she had lost her life. And a whole lot of conservative people were saying, see, that's what, you weren't upset about, people rioting and looting during Black Lives Matter. And so that's how I first heard about it. Now you play that out some, and it turns out she was actually one of the organizers of this event. She was a former Air Force veteran like me, and she planned a lot of these things for Trump supporters. Okay, so I didn't know that when I wrote the report, but the question I asked doesn't matter the situation of her death. What matters is the people responding. The people who first heard about her death were calling for accountability, right? Because they thought she was one of the guards or one of the workers. And everybody else was saying, oh, you want accountability now? We should, you weren't, did you agree with all that Black Lives Matter protesting? Now you're upset? You weren't upset before. Whether or not you agree with someone who protested or didn't protest before, or someone who supported the protest or didn't support the protest before, there's still a loss of life. And in the moments when we thought the loss of life was from somebody who was an innocent bystander, the response should not have been, did you agree with all that last time? Then you have nothing to say. It should be, yes, we should hold her shooter accountable. Now, as things played out, she was actually shot by a Capitol guard doing his job, and I support his right to do his job. But think about what those comments reflected to a person who looked like me. As if supporting the protest against police brutality automatically means you can't have an opinion about that loss of life. I'm going to tell you right now, and if you don't agree with me, I encourage you to do your own Google research, okay? If people who look like me had scaled those Capitol walls, back during the summer of racial unrest, they would have been shot, and you know it. People who look like my son would not have climbed into the Capitol with weapons and then been allowed to take selfies with the guards, and you know it. People who look like my son would not have had enough time to pose for a picture with government accoutrements. They would have been on the floor with a knee in their back, and you know it. It's time for us to put aside personal bias, party lines, and preconceived notions. It's time to stop being afraid to discuss these issues for fear of being shunned by our professional peers, our church peers, our personal peers, or in the case of my interracial family, our family peers. My Lord, my family is divided about this thing, and it's such a shame. I do believe we need to make this nation the great beacon of freedom it was originally conceived to be. But I don't think we're ever going to get there if we keep ignoring the problem. Now, when I retired from the Air Force back in November, I had a very, very small RSVP list for the ceremony. The ceremony was actually, I think it was the last day of July or something like that, maybe the beginning of August. So I had a small RSVP list, 15 folks who I knew loved me, right? And unfortunately, I'm really glad that he came to do it. A former MAGCOM commander came to be my officiant. He was one of my former bosses, one of the best guys I ever worked for. And we had about 20 party crashers from throughout the headquarters that were only there to mingle. Like, I'm looking out to give my retirement speech, and the first two rows of people are people I don't know. Other than the general who was officiating and his spouse, and then my family, I didn't know who these other people were. I'm like, who are these people and why are they here? And then I look at the stars and I think, okay, well, they're all here to see the general, right? They were already uncomfortable enough with my telling the stories of how the Air Force Academy Physics Department told me blacks can't do physics, and how Major Mike Morrison was falsely accused so he wouldn't be the first black person to place first in his intel class, okay? So I didn't finish my speech. I really don't think they could have handled it, and I hope you can handle it today. And if it angers you, before you unsubscribe, I want you to PM me your opinion or go ahead and text me. I'm going to give you my text number. That's how passionate I am about this. My text number is 254-274-3055. You can send me a message and let me know your opinion. I put it out there. I always genuinely want to understand people's opinions. And you can find my collection of all these different opinions on my People Like Me project. I can tell you where that is offline. Just go ahead and text me and I'll send you the link. All right. Here's the closing that I left off that speech. Throughout most of my career, I have had to work and maintain a good attitude, despite the extreme difference in what my coworkers say about people like me when I'm around and when they don't realize I'm in the office. That's why I'm going to implore you to be more considerate and careful about what you say and the attitudes you express. For example, a very common phrase in our nation right now is "Make America Great Again." And I always wonder when people say that, which America are you wanting to return to? The 90s, where I was told blacks can't do physics? The 80s, where almost every movie portrays black people as servile, stupid, or criminal? The 70s, where women couldn't attend the Air Force Academy that I graduated from? The 60s, where people of color couldn't attend the Air Force Academy that I graduated from? Oh, I know. You want to return to the 50s, where we had nuclear families and stay-at-home moms. Except people who look like me weren't allowed to exercise the voting rights that were granted to them in the original 15th Amendment of 1869. And people who look like me certainly wouldn't have been lieutenant colonel physicists in the Air Force. See, a lot of you weren't thinking about me when you repeated that phrase, pasted it all over your cubicles, flew that flag from your base housing door. And I don't think our nation can ever move forward until we all stop thinking about just ourselves and start considering the challenges that others face. And as leaders, it starts with us. So that was the Facebook post that I posted. I let people know about my feelings, and I ended it with that quote from my speech that I actually cut off of my speech because I didn't think the audience could handle it. And it has definitely attracted a lot of attention. Regardless of your feelings on the issue, I want to implore you to look at the situation. Look at the videos or the pictures. Look at the difference in how people who look like me are treated in these kinds of situations versus people who look like my white husband. We cannot not acknowledge that there is a problem in this nation. And I had one person email me. That part of the problem is people do not want to lose the great civilization that built all of this. The great, they didn't say the great race that built all this. I forget how they put it. I should have pulled it up before I started recording this. But basically, their gist was, let me just summarize. Their gist was white people did all of this. They built the infrastructure in the cities and they built the governments and they did all this stuff and they did all these things that are good. And now you want to make everybody brown, and here's what happens with all the brown people. And I thought, wow. I don't even know how to respond to that. I understand it. I can appreciate the argument, and I don't use appreciate in the way we traditionally use it as, oh, I like that, but I mean it in an intellectual extent, intellectual understanding. You know, when you read the whole thing that he wrote, I can see where he's coming from. But he has no understanding at all of where I'm coming from. And all I'm asking anybody to do is to understand where somebody else is coming from. And I found it really interesting in all of the responses to that post that talked about how, Make America Great Again camp is doing this and that for the nation, and these people are doing that for the nation, and these people are doing that for the nation. Like, nobody ever wanted to respond to my question. When you say Make America Great Again, what America do you really want to return to? Because from my perspective as a brown woman, there's no place that was a better decade for us than anyone we're living in right now. And then everybody's like, oh, well, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. That's not what it means. It's not what it means. No, it's not what it means to you, but you got to look at how it means to me. And I'm all about restoring America's great position in the world. I don't think we have a great position in the world. Okay. I don't think we're the world leader anymore. I think we're the world laughingstock right now. Right. And so I'm all about restoring America's position as a great nation, but I don't think we will be able to do that if we continue the attitudes of the past. We have to move forward. And one of the first steps in moving forward is being able to understand that, hey, we built this nation on the back of a lot of people. We took land from people that we shouldn't have took it from. We made slave labor out of people we shouldn't have made slave labor from. We did all these things to make America a great and wealthy nation. Now, how do we move forward with an enlightened and elevated mindset and make America a great nation that's also great for all of its people? It doesn't matter who planned this event or what group executed it. That is not the point. The point is people like me, people who look like me, could not have executed this because they would have been executed. And before we can move forward in a world where we're truly building wealth together, we have got to understand that this is still a problem in our nation. I don't identify with any party lines, but I'm a very conservative person. And one thing that really saddens me from so many conservative responses to what happened this week is that most are still missing the point of what so many people of color are upset at right now. No one is denying anybody their right to protest. We are simply asking the rest of the country to acknowledge that if it were a group of people of color, it would have been handled with violence, the way it's been handled for the last 400 years. When my friend told me 10 years ago not to call people Oriental because that was offensive to Asians, I didn't waste any breath arguing with her. I just accepted her opinion, whether I agreed or not, right? You know what I did? I stopped calling people Oriental. I didn't argue with her about how everyone else said it. And if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you look around at some of the shows and the books and things, and you'll see how prevalent that term was. I didn't point that out to her. I just said, oh, wow, I never saw it that way. Thank you for letting me know. This right here in our nation is an opportunity for people who do not experience racism on a daily basis to open up their eyes to the disparity of justice in our nation from how majority and minority members are treated. Again, this is not about who's right or wrong as far as political ideologies. This isn't even about the fact that people were arrested. I'm asking you to acknowledge that people who look like me wouldn't even have gotten to the point of being arrested because they would have been shot. I'm not asking you to vote any particular way. I'm not asking you to change your conservative values. I'm not asking you to change your liberal values, depending on where you fall on the spectrum. I'm not asking you to change any of that. All I'm asking you to acknowledge is that we have a problem. And to truly continue this nation being the best nation in the world for building wealth and walking in abundance, we have to first acknowledge that we have a problem. I'm JJ Conway. Thanks for listening. Y'all take care and be blessed. Love the podcast? Be sure to like, subscribe, and forward to 3 friends. You can ask a question or take a life-changing class at buildingwealthtogether.com. Now, go walk in abundance and leave a legacy.